after we gave birth to our first son. She was essentially incapacitated for 4 months with a herniated disc and had to have reconstructive surgery. Her story is not unusual of families that struggle as soon as a child is born. Why are we not extending support to those families to make sure that they can connect with their child and recover
Segment
health?
here with our guest, Richard Trent, Executive Director of Main Street Alliance, about what all of these Trump budget cuts are doing to small business and a level playing field for competition in the American economy. Richard Trent, good morning. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me back. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. We talked to you when you were fairly brand new on the job, and we've certainly got a lot of ground to cover in terms of what Main Street Alliance members want to see from this new administration. We know what they don't like. They don't like an unlevel playing field. They don't like uncertainty. They don't like to see cuts in funding or services. We appear to be checking all those boxes at this point in the new administration. How do you prioritize what you've got to convey to members of Congress and members of state legislatures about what is most important to small businesses in this very uncertain era that we have entered?
Yeah, and you might hear my 7-month-old in the background here in a second.
That's all right. That's never an issue. No problem.
These are one of the foundational concerns of folks that are uplifting Main Street, small business owners, people that just like the mom and pop store down the street, healthcare, childcare, and access to capital. If you ask any small business owner, usually if they're struggling with something, it's one of those three things. And so it's that energy that we tried to carry into Madison last week with our day of action, where we had 70 plus small business owners and Main Street advocates really taking it to state legislators and saying, listen, this is unacceptable. We want to see $500 million to support things like expanded childcare access and make sure that our childcare operators can actually function. We want to see the extension of Medicaid support, especially for postpartum support, where Wisconsin is the only state in the union that doesn't offer that. So especially for someone like me and my wife, after we gave birth to our first son, she was essentially incapacitated for 4 months with a herniated disc and had to have reconstructive surgery. Her story is not unusual of families that struggle as soon as a child is born. Why are we not extending support to those families to make sure that they can connect with their child and recover healthily? And then lastly, the big thing was the extension of the Main Street Bounceback program, which we know a couple of years ago was huge for addressing Wisconsin City's empty storefront problem, right? So we were looking for a $50 million addition to the budget to make sure that small businesses have that crucial access to capital that keeps them in the game.
We have not talked about Governor Evers and the Main Street Bounceback program for a long time, and that really is one of the biggest feathers in his cap in helping Wisconsin have one of the best recoveries from the pandemic of all the states. Was all of those, small comparatively grants that went to small Main Street businesses. It wasn't small for them; it kept them afloat, and it's a good reminder that we should come back and visit some of these creative ideas. Let me touch on where you talked about healthcare, childcare, access to capital. Let me talk about the access to capital for a moment. And I know this is probably more from a national standpoint than a state standpoint. But we have talked about what these cuts, these broken contracts are doing to farmers in Wisconsin and across the country, where the federal government made a contract. We're paying you for putting your land in this conservation program and things like that. And now these programs are being ended abruptly. And these are things where farmers had to borrow money to engage in conservation practices, and then they'd borrow that from a local bank, and then the government would make a payment and they'd pay back the loan. I can only imagine that there's those same fears in terms of access to capital that are being created by the uncertainty that the Trump administration is bringing to key programs for small businesses.
It's a clear indication of just how out of touch the administration is with the needs, the challenges of working class Americans, small business owners. A clear indication is what's happening at the SBA, the Small Business Administration. The SBA has always been this key lifeline for small business owners and for Main Street advocates. Whether it's the mass firings of between 400 and 700 staff there, or now this decision to house student loans services in the SBA. It's abundantly clear to me when you hear things like that they don't recognize that 50% of American small businesses are operating on just a month of cash flow, right? Like if you have a solid understanding of the challenges that our working class is facing in this country, you don't make callous decisions like this. That it's really just spit in the face of so many just hardworking citizens.
Well, right, and again, it brings up that note that these are not things that Donald Trump specifically campaigned on. For all the talk of cutting out, waste, fraud, and abuse, at no point did he say, and by the way, small business owner, you're the waste that I'm looking to cut. He never specifically outlined that kind of thing at all. Now, on top of all of this is the trade war that he's ignited with some of our biggest allies or trading partners. And I know we talk about this again on a large scale, agriculture writ large, or steel or aluminum, but any kind of massive increase in tariffs is going to have that spillover effect. And we've talked about it being passed on to the consumer, but somewhere between all of that is the small business owner as well. What are your thoughts on what these higher tariffs are doing to small business?
So, we've spent the last 4 years basically agreeing that inflation is an existential threat to a strong economy, right? The Biden administration ran on this, trying to burnish their credentials as inflation fighters. The Trump administration, really highlighted the fact that inflation was messing up the survival, the thriving of so many different Americans. Now we're going back into the same inflationary environment because of policies like this. So, I mean, we don't talk enough about how inflationary tariff policies of the Trump administration are and will become, and what this means for sort of putting upward pressure on interest rates. Because when the goods that you're importing become more expensive, those are costs ultimately that are going to have to be passed on to the consumer, right? If you're a small business owner who's running a cafe and there's a tariff on coffee from a South American country, now your operating costs have just gone up. Those costs are going to be fronted on to the consumer, and all of a sudden it's 50, 75, $1 more for a cup of coffee than it was just a few months ago. Those are inflationary forces on the economy that are going to have real devastating impacts on working class Americans. And just as we're getting out of this inflationary drama, it feels like we're headed right back in with these ridiculous policies.
And on top of that is the notion that for the wholesalers out there, for small businesses, even if the tariffs are brought down or eliminated at some point, that's not to say that every wholesaler is going to have a corresponding reduction in prices. I mean, these price increases can be sticky, shall we say, and we're creating essentially long-term inflation for small business owners if that's the case.
That's exactly right. And one other challenge that isn't highlighted enough is just the fact that, sometimes a targeted tariff can be okay, right? If you want to gin up an industry that's important to the growth of the American economy. But when you've got these blanket tariffs that are administered and then taken away and then administered and taken away, what happens is small business owners, Main Street, are operating within this cloud of like ambient uncertainty, which really impacts their ability to plan and to say, hey, we wanted to hire XYZ staff member 3-6 months down the road. They can no longer make decisions like that because the economic environment is so clouded with these will they, won't they tariff policies. So I think that's kind of another way that we need to be thinking about this is like Main Street entrepreneurs deserve the economic certainty of like a clear set of rules or policies for the economy, and they don't have that right now.
We're talking to Richard Trent. He's the executive director of the Main Street Alliance. And a lot of the times when we've talked to you or to Sean Fediplace or to other small business owners, and we say, why are you taking the step of advocating for things like expanded Medicaid or issues like minimum wage and things like that? It really just does come down to capitalism works best with competition when competition is fair. And it's these kinds of government policies that essentially provide a level playing field so that small businesses can compete and can compete with large businesses too. And so we've noticed that uptick in policy advocacy by small business people. Main Street Alliance appears to be just continuing to grow and give voice to these small business concerns. Tell me about the small Main Street Alliance growth.
Yeah, Pat, we can have nice things. It's like this is Main Street Alliance's "we can have nice things" agenda. It's we've got to break free from the scarcity mindset and realize that these are that the industries that we decide to prop up or invest in. There are a couple people making very pointed decisions to either help them out or to not. And every single state makes investments, or whether it's subsidies or tax breaks for the industries that they deem important for growing the economy. Well, we've got to bring that same mentality to Main Street. Main Street and small businesses create 2/3 of new jobs. 99% of all companies in this country are small businesses. And if you don't recognize that as the lifeblood, as really the beating heart of the American economy, then you're out of touch. And so we need to be thinking of what are the investments we can make in Main Street, in the small business sector, in the same way that we invest in, depending on the state, oil and gas, or health, or different industries that help to prop up the economy, right? So that's kind of the angle that we're approaching this with, is like these aren't handouts. These aren't like people that are just begging for handouts. These are people that recognize that a stronger Main Street means making sure that people don't have to choose between taking care of a loved one and receiving a paycheck. It's these very simple things, these simple investments, not handouts, that we can make in Main Street that would make a really big difference in the lived experience of so many different Wisconsinites.
Richard Trent is the executive director of Main Street Alliance. Richard, great to visit with you again. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll look forward to a visit again real soon.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you, Richard.